Hello, listeners. Welcome to Sailing the East podcast. I'm Bela and Mike.
And I'm Mike Wasserman.
This is our podcast about sailing the east coast of the United States. In some episodes, we will focus on passages and destinations. In other episodes, we will talk about boats, equipment, and techniques. And when we come across an interesting person, we'll try to get them as a guest on the show.
Now, what makes this podcast unusual is that only one of us sails.
That would be me, Bela. I have been sailing for over 30 years, not across oceans, but on lakes and coastal cruising on the east coast of the United States.
And I, Mike, know very little about sailing. Now, I live in Germany, a long way away from any body of water larger than a thimble, but I have the interest and Bela has the patience to answer my questions about sailing. And together we hope that this makes for some interesting listening. Bela, is there anything interesting going on in your world right now?
Well, Mike, we had another listener question. Andy, a listener, noticed the Support the Podcast link at the bottom of the show notes. He asked us if it would be helpful to click this link. And do we get the money, or does it go to our podcast host, Anchor?
Bela, this is a good question. Andy, thanks for asking. Bela, I'll let you take this question because you handle the business end of this operation.
Sure, Mike. Well, you and I don't do this for the money. But there are many other podcasters who are entrepreneurs and trying to earn some extra income from their podcast. So like supporting public radio or subscribing to magazines, it's a nice thing to support your favorite podcast, if you have the means. There are a couple of ways you can do this. As you know, we use Anchor to host and distribute this podcast. Well, Anchor has a built-in way for listeners to support the podcast. In your podcasting app, at the bottom of the podcasting show notes, there's a link that you can support the show. From 99 cents a month up to $9.99 a month, you can support that specific podcast to help defray the cost of producing it. And you can cancel anytime. So it's kind of a nice gesture if you want to support some of your favorites. And like I said, it's built into Anchor and it shows up at the bottom of your show notes, even if you are using a different app besides Anchor to listen to the podcast. Patreon, which you may have heard of, is a very popular way that many YouTubers and podcasters use to receiving listener support as well. Well, this week, we got our first listener support to the podcast. So a big thank you to Andrew, our first supporter.
Yeah, Bela, good answer to this question. Thanks. I mean, we really do like podcasting, and we think it's valuable to bring different voices and different experiences that are not all kind of part of mainstream media, especially because there's a lot of bad news and a lot of things that are biased and nasty in a lot of the media. We like to offer kind of fairly non-controversial and positive kind of things for people to listen to. And we don't do this for the money, but you know, if you haven't thought about the idea of supporting some of your favorite podcasters, like especially the independent and entrepreneurial ones, it's kind of a nice idea. And again, we realize, especially right now, that not everybody has spare change laying around. But for $1 a month, think about it like a magazine subscription or like you said, a public radio support or something like that. It's a nice thing to do. And yeah, Andy, good question. And at least with Anchor, everything you do donate or use to support the podcast goes directly to the podcaster. Based on what I know, that Anchor doesn't take any of it. Now, we have to pay to put our stuff on there, but they're not taking money on both ends of the business model as far as I know. So, Bela, let's get to today's question. Now, my question is this. I'm curious about chartering a sailboat. I mean, I've heard about this, and two of my very first sailing trips that I've been on were both on chartered boats, but I didn't arrange either of these. And, you know me, I'm not the sailor. I don't know I didn't know. Now I'm learning more, which is great, but I didn't know back then what to ask for and who to deal with, and I didn't want anything to do with that. But now that I have a little more interest and you've been teaching me more and more, is chartering a boat something I want to do? And if so, what's the process? So maybe today you can tell me a little more about chartering a boat.
Yeah, Mike, I'll try to fill in the blanks. So I think chartering has some great advantages. So number one is that typical charters can be as short as a day or as long as a month. And some of this depends on where you will be chartering, which geographic area. So for example, in the British Virgin Islands and the Caribbean, most charters are 7 to 9 to maybe 14 days in length. That seems to be sort of the norm down in the Caribbean and the British Virgin Islands. For example, in the Chesapeake Bay, they are typically either 2 days long, meaning Saturday and Sunday, or they're 5 days, Monday through Friday, or all 7 days for the whole week. So you can see charter companies are trying to, maximize the amount of time boats are being chartered because that maximizes their income. So that's what they try to do to accommodate the specific area they're in. Charter companies also tend to be much more flexible during the off season. So if they have a boat that's just sitting there and you're interested in it and no one's going to charter it, then you can get a 2 or 3 or 4 day charter if you want. So call the charter company, find out what they have. And how do you find a charter company? Well, the same way you find anything else. You get on the internet and you do a search. They all have nice websites. Oftentimes you can look at their calendar, when the boats are available, what are the different types of boats that they have. The other great thing about go ahead. I'm sorry.
So Bela, this is interesting. So in the off season, you can kind of negotiate a little bit. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yep. So the prices are typically lower. So they have a high season price and a shoulder season, or a low season price, and they're 20% different. So you can save some money in the off season, and they tend to be more flexible on the length of time for the charter, is what I'm trying to say.
So,
right?
But you can negotiate on time. Can you ever negotiate on price, or is that a no-no?
I have not been successful in negotiating on price, and quite honestly, I haven't tried.
Okay.
Right. But I have been successful in saying I want to pick the boat up on Tuesday and drop it off on Tuesday, as opposed to the typical pick it up Monday, drop it off Friday, or pick it up Saturday, drop it off Saturday. Yeah.
All right. That's good to keep in mind. Thanks. Keep going.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah. No, it's a good question. The other interesting thing about chartering is it's a great way to sort of check out different places to sail without having to sail your boat there. So if you want to go sailing in the Mediterranean, there's a ton of charter companies in the Mediterranean, and you can go charter a boat for a week or two, and it's a great vacation, right? The same thing is true with the Caribbean. The same thing is true with the South Pacific, the coast of Australia, up and down the coast of the United States, the Gulf of Mexico, Belize in Mexico, Sea of Cortez. So there's a lot of places that you can go and sort of have a combination vacation, sail around there, check out the region, and you get to experience different types of boats. This is one of the ways that I learned the type of boat that I want, right? It helped me sort of narrow my selection down and requirements of this vast different types of boats and models and sizes and accommodations and equipment down to, hey, this is the thing that works for me. So I found it to be a great way of doing it. So there's choice in the types of boats you charter, whether they be monohulls or catamarans, to the places around the world that you're going to charter, and the length of time. So it's really quite nice.
So Bela, another dumb question: do I need some sort of a license to charter a boat?
Maybe. So there are 2 types of charters. Typically 2 types. One is with a captain, meaning there is going to be a captain on the boat that you're going to hire as part of the charter. And so that means you are not responsible for sailing the boat. If you want to just sit on the boat and enjoy the passage and sailing around, you can do that. If you want to sort of help and assist the captain, they'll give you some instruction and they'll guide you and sort of look over you. So there's a range with a captain. In that case, the captain is the one responsible for the boat. You don't need any type of license or a certification. The other type of charter is called a bareboat charter. That means it's just you. There's no crew, no other person from the charter company or no other captain, and that you are the captain and you are the one responsible for the boat. So most bareboat charters require some sort of experience or credential. In the United States, there are 2 major organizations that do sail training leading up to a bareboat chartering credential. One is called the American Sailing Association, and the other one is U.S. Sailing. And both of them have very good courses and are accepted by most North American charter companies once you get a certification from them. My wife, Elaine, and I both took an American Sailing Association week-long course where we received what's called a bareboat certificate. And that has worked for us in all the charters. No one's ever questioned it in order to charter a boat. And our very first charter that we did, which was on Lake Champlain, which is a 120-mile lake that borders New York State and Vermont. I did not, and Lane and I, neither one of us had any sort of certification. So I sent the charter company my sort of sailing resume, which basically said, I've been sailing on a few other people's large boats, but we had a Catalina 22 for 20 plus years, and we've sailed. And what they did was we went up, my wife and I went up to the charter location, and we went out with the captain for about 4 hours. So we went out on a boat for 4 hours with the captain, and we sort of demonstrated our skills to the captain. And, he asked us to do a few things. He showed us some things from the boat, and then he okayed the charter. So he basically went back to the charter company and said, yeah, these folks know what they're doing. It's okay for you to charter a boat to them.
It's like taking a driver's test. It must have been pretty nerve-wracking, yeah?
yeah. I didn't think of it that way, but you're right. It was
little
sort
pressure.
of like taking a driver's test. Yes. And then, we returned to that place a few times and chartered from them. And then I think it was after our third charter, we said, hey, we really like this. And then we went and took the American Sailing Association certification course because we knew we wanted to do it. Now, in different parts of the world have different requirements. So in the United States, sometimes you can get away with nothing. It sort of depends on the charter company. And it depends, even in the United States, it depends on the state. So some states have licensing or certification requirements for boating, and other states do not. So some of this is going to depend. It's starting to tighten up, if you will, in the United States. More and more states are requiring some sort of nominal boater education before they let you out on any type of boat, not just a sailboat, but that's just sort of a state requirement. And then the charter company may have its own requirements. In other parts of the world, like the Mediterranean or the South Pacific, they have some very specific licensing requirements. Again, this is country by country for taking out a boat. So you have to sort of check with where the destination that you're going to, particularly if it's outside the United States, as to what those requirements will be. Oftentimes, that'll be stated on their website as to what type of certification you need.
Yeah, I know here in Germany, Bela, that lakes of a certain size, you need a special license, but smaller lakes are okay. And boats of a certain size, you need a special license. Other boats, you don't. Like I have a friend who chartered a houseboat, not a sailboat, right? But because he was sailing on a body of water that was not as smaller than the set size, and because the motor wasn't so big or the length wasn't so big, he didn't need a license. But other times you do. So even within a country, I think it can vary. So check. So first, chartering is a good idea. Second, you can kind of find a charter company through the internet and kind of figure out the time and the boat and the pickup and the drop off and all these things. Third is if you want to do a bareboat charter, you usually need some sort of certification. Got it. Let's talk about the process now. So if I want to do this, what are the steps that I should follow?
Well, I think the first thing to think about is the location you want to go to. So do you want to go, for example, the British Virgin Islands is sort of a hotbed for chartering. It's nice down there when it's cold up north here. They have good winds because they're in the trade wind belt. So they have pretty consistent winds. And there's a group of islands there where you can basically do a day sail from island to island to island and anchor overnight. And it's sort of set up for a week-long trip. So that's sort of a very nice place to go. But so first figure out where you want to go. And then you got to figure out the charter company. So depending upon where you go, so for example, in the British Virgin Islands or in the Chesapeake Bay, there's at least a dozen, if not more, companies that you can charter a boat from, because these are very popular places to charter. Up on Lake Champlain, I believe right now there's one company that you can charter a boat from. So part of it has to do with where you want to go. And of course, different times of the year, different places are better than others. You can't charter a boat in the middle of January up on Lake Champlain unless it's an ice boat, because it's sort of frozen over. So that's sort of one thing you want to think through. And listen to the reviews or read the reviews on the charter companies. Also, think about the type and size of boat you want. Do you want to charter a catamaran? Do you want to charter a monohull? Do you want to charter something in the mid 30 feet, or do you want to charter something 50 feet long? So you got to think that through, because not all charter companies have all different types of boats. So you got to think about location. You got to think about the type of boat and the size of boat you want to charter. And then I think, you reach out to them and they'll tell you what the process is. And each process is a little bit different, but you sort of have to fill out an application. They'll probably want to see a sailing resume or your certifications that might be required. And you can pick out the boat. They'll have an inventory of their boats and their availability. And then they usually require a deposit. They usually require about a 50% deposit to kind of hold your reservation. And then the balance is due at some point in time close to the you showing up, or maybe at the time you show up. And then that's it. So the boat's there. And then, of course, you got to sort of think about your favorite topic, Mike. And that's what food, right? So we're gonna go out on this boat for 5 days. So we need to think about the food that we need to bring.
Yeah, I forgot about the food. This is naturally very important to me. And beverages. Don't forget beverages. So tell me how that works.
Yeah, so this is interesting. So there are some charter companies, not all, but some charter companies will provision. So provisioning the boat is the term that's used, the nautical term used for sort of putting food on the boat. And so some charter companies will provision for you. And that means, you fill out a form about what you like, what you're allergic to, what you don't like. And, they'll stock up the boat for a fee. So when you show up, boom, everything's ready to go. The other one is we typically, when we go, we do our own provisioning. So depending upon where we're going, most places, most charter companies have a pretty good grocery store that's relatively close by. But if you're going to do your own provisioning, that's another thing you want to check out. Is there a grocery store? How far away is the grocery store? So the interesting thing about provisioning a boat is this is where it takes a little bit of planning. And because, if you're going out for 7 days, let's say, you don't want to run out of your favorite thing on day number 3. So you sort of have to sit down and, plan out all your meals. And interestingly enough, when we took our course about bareboat chartering, one of the things we did was sort of provisioning and meal planning and sort of how to do it. And, the amount of food to plan per person per day and the amount of water you need to bring with you, et cetera. Because remember, you're sort of, for the most part, out on a little island, that self-contained island. And you have the food that you have with you. And again, depending upon where you are, it might be very easy to go from one destination and 2 days later go someplace different, and there's a grocery store right there, so you can go get some stuff. But other places you go, there isn't. So you have to really be self-reliant for a number of days. So getting provisioning is sort of important.
Interesting. So I guess all charter boats are going to have a small refrigerator, some sort of freezer, a stove, the basics, or do you have to ask about what the appliances and things like that are?
Most boats that you're going to charter will have those things on them. So anything above 35, 36 feet is going to have a refrigerator and a freezer. Now, when you think about refrigerator and freezer, don't think like the one you have at home, but try to think back to your college days and the size fridge and freezer you may have had in your dorm room. So they're pretty small. They're not big. Most stoves are propane stoves, and they're 2 or 3 burners. So, everything is sort of a little bit smaller than you might be used to at home. So here again, you got to think about meal planning and this notion of I only have so much space in the fridge and freezer, so I got to buy food that doesn't need to be refrigerated if I'm going for an extended period of time. So again, it's real important. So that's really good. And I think the other thing to sort of think about is this notion of different boats. Is it do I need to learn about a different boat? And one thing that we should talk about is when you charter a boat, sailing a boat is sort of like driving a car. Once you drive a car, you can sort of figure out how to drive a different brand or different model car. It's pretty easy. The pedals are in the same place. The steering wheel's in the same place. But other things are not in the same place, right? How to adjust the seat might be different. Where the radio and knobs are might be different. The way the turn signal and the windshield wipers work may be different. So a boat's sort of similar to that. The sailing aspects are pretty similar from boat to boat, but sort of where the equipment is, how the toilets work, or the heads as they're called on a boat, how the stove works, how to switch from battery power to shore power might be different. So typically most charter boats, when you get there and after you check in, they're going to take 2 or 3 hours and they're going to do a briefing with you where someone's going to come with you on the boat while it's at the dock, and they're going to go through all of the systems on the boat. They'll show you where the emergency equipment is. They'll show you how the anchor works. They'll show you how the radio works. They'll take you through all of these things that you need to know, both from a safety aspect and the electrical system, the navigation equipment, etc. So these pre-departure briefings are really important because each boat is different, again, in certain ways. So that's another thing I did want to mention. Someone might be thinking about.
And I seem to recall there's always like a manual, like a guidebook, like here's a binder with the pages and here's kind of the key things. I remember we had that and had to look some stuff up. That's typical, isn't it?
That's right. So just like maybe when you rent an Airbnb, there's oftentimes a 3-ring folder with pages in it that says emergency phone numbers, here's how this works, here's how that works, etc. It's very similar on a boat. So here again, this is the difference between some charter companies. Some charter companies pay more attention to this than others do, and some will do a more thorough job than others will. And this is where reading the reviews can be very helpful. But most of them have some type of book that's really taking the volumes of books that are on the boat, describing all of the equipment in detail and reducing it down to the things that you will most likely need to know. And they put it into one convenient place for you. And quite honestly, I do that on my boat for myself. I have a little boat, a little 3-ring binder that sort of has various key bits of information about my boat. That those are the things that I need to look up, 80% of the time, and the other 20% of the time I'll have to bring out the equipment manual and dive through that.
Cool. So I have one last question, and this is a classic question from a guy like me, Bela. You know my history here. But what happens if you're on a charter and something breaks and I hope this never happens, but I'm sure it does, there's an accident of some sort?
Yeah. Well, good question. And I have a little experience with this. We chartered a sailboat down in Tampa Bay, down in Florida, and we're out in the Gulf of Mexico, sailed around there. And one day we're sort of heading back in towards the dock, and the wind was blowing really nice, and we get into Tampa Bay, and the wind sort of died down, and we go to turn the motor on, and we turn the key, and nothing. So here we are, we're bopping around in a sailboat with no wind, and we couldn't start the motor. So in that little 3-ring binder, it tells you what to do. So we first called the charter company, and they said, okay, where are you? And we told them, and they said, okay, call the tow company. So some larger charter companies will have their own sort of response team that'll come out, right? Some of these charter companies are large. They're chartering 20, 30 boats a week. And other charter companies are small. They're chartering 2 or 3 boats a week. So some of these larger charter companies will have, a couple of folks who are in a little power boat that at least if you're within range, they can come over to you and try to diagnose and help fix a problem. This charter company did not. They were smaller. So there's various different tow services, just like there's AAA for the road and tow trucks. They have a similar types of service for boats. And so the charter company said, here's the phone number, give the tow service a call. They'll be expecting your call. And we called them up, told them our location, and took them about an hour to get there, and they towed us back to the dock. So that sort of takes care of those types of equipment failures. If you're out sailing and you hit something and the boat starts to leak and take on water, this is where that charter briefing is really important. You got to know how to turn on the bilge pump. You got to know where the emergency gear is. You got to know all that kind of stuff, right? Because you're going to do whatever you can to stop the water coming into the boat. So that's sort of like the worst thing that can happen is the boat's going to start sinking on you. That's a bad thing. You don't want to do that. But if other things break or you hit something, you might hit a rock or a shallow spot. Here again, a tow company can pull you off, and you might have to call them. But if you damage the boat, most charter companies, like car rental companies, have insurance that sometimes is required and it's included in the charter price. Other times it's an option. Some of them have significant deductibles. Some of them don't have deductibles. So this is something that you need to sort of figure out before you charter the boat. Sort of what's my liability if something should happen and break on the boat.
Great. Bela, this makes me feel a lot better. It's nice to know there's systems in place and there's insurance and things like that. And those are good questions for me to ask when I go to make my first charter on my own. So I think it's time to wrap this episode up. I appreciate you putting this together. Just to summarize, your advice is that chartering can be a great idea, both for new sailors and experienced sailors who want to go see different parts of the world and don't have time to spend weeks and weeks on the water with their own boat. Right? It's a nice way to get a range of experience. Some advanced planning is required to do this. You have lots of choices. You could do, big choices be, do you want a crewed boat or a bareboat experience? Do you want provision versus non-provision? So you got to do a little homework and a little thinking. But I think you really laid these things out for me nice and clear, Bela, and I appreciate it. So listeners, thanks for joining us for another episode. We hope you found our conversation about chartering a boat interesting and thought-provoking. If you have questions about what we discussed today or suggestions for future episodes, please, as always, feel free to get in touch with us. Our email is sailingtheeast, all one word, @gmail.com.
And if you enjoyed the podcast, let us know, or better yet, tell a friend. So until next time, signing off from upstate New York. See you soon, Mike.
Thanks, Bela. That's great. And from over here in Münster, Germany, see you next time.